The other day I got asked a question, which I think is a fair one, and it's something that periodically comes up. And that is if Canada is so bad, if it hates people of your background so much, if it's anti Christian, if it's so liberal, if it's so horrible, if it's so paused, why do you stay there? Why don't you move somewhere else? Why don't you move to a more conservative society like Poland or Russia or Singapore? Or even if you want to go to an Anglo place to red state America? And the simple answer to that, and I'm sorry if I'm flippant, the reason I don't move to Russia is I'm not Russian. I'm not ethnically Russian, I don't speak Russian, and I'm not Russian Orthodox. So I don't really get why I would move there, even if I do appreciate a lot of their social policies, which are far more conservative than those pursued in a lot of Western countries. But this is something that like periodically comes up. It's like, why don't you move to Poland? Why don't you move to Singapore? And there are people in these circles who do that, who get tired of living in the West and they move to Poland or Hungary or some other more conservative country where the cost of living is lower. And because you can do basically an internet business anywhere in the world. So if you can live somewhere for like 80% less money, you don't have to put up with the same restrictions on free speech, you might as well go there. But once again, it's like I'm not Hungarian, I'm not Chinese or Malaysian, I'm not Polish. I guess I'm Catholic and European, so I guess Poland sort of makes sense, but it's just not my heritage. In right or wrong, and for all the issues I have with it, Canada's my home. I grew up in southern Ontario. I've moved to Manitoba now, but it's still part of Canada. It still has similar culture. It still has similar institutions. It's not like I left the country. And it's a big step to go somewhere else, but it's home, and it's just it's not that easy if you grow up somewhere and you're immersed in the culture, even if there's a lot of aspects you don't like it, and the way things are done, the slang, the services provided by government, the people, all that stuff is something that you're used to and it's a part of you, even if a lot of aspects of it you take a major issue with it. And I recently went to Montana, which is a beautiful state, by the way, and the people there are like so much more. I don't think Montana is considered a particularly conservative state, but like the amount of Christian stuff I saw there, there was very few rainbow flags. Everybody was of same background as me, if you catch my meaning. Why don't I just go there? And it's like maybe at some point, if things get too bad in Canada, I'll move to a red state. But I mean, I'm used to living in urban environments. I'm not really a rural person. My career's not really a rural career. And it is there is a lot of cultural differences, even if maybe my values are more in line with a lot of the people who live in Montana more than in Canada. There are certain just, and I find this even with people in these circles who I agree with on like 70 to 80% of issues. There's certain sensibilities I have from being Canadian, from coming from an upper middle class background, from living in southern Ontario, that are just kind of alien to them and are kind of alien to me. Aside from that, the current social revolution is impacting everywhere on Earth. Who knows how long that these other countries are going to remain somewhat intact relative to Canada? They could collapse at any given time. A lot of African countries have held out for a while, and I'm not praising Africa. I'm just saying a lot of them were more socially conservative, but the U.S. has forced a lot of them to liberalize most of their social laws. And if I were to move to Russia, who knows? When Putin dies, things might go to hell. It might just become another generic neoliberal state. My background is Anglo and German Canadian, which is basically just Anglo Canadian. So I'm an Anglo Canadian. That's how I identify culturally. That's how I identify ethnically. That's how I identify in terms of like my accent and stuff like that. And it's very hard to just say like screw all that, none of that matters. I'm just going to move to Alabama or Texas or Florida or somewhere that more shares my religious and social values, even if the culture there is fairly different. And you do notice that if you traveled much in North America, at least in my experience, there are some differences in culture. Even though American and Canadian culture are probably two of the closest in the world, there is a lot of culture shock when you go from one place to another. Canadians just tend to be a lot more collectivist by nature. I don't know if that's just a thing that cold climates breed, because it seems like most cold climate countries have that, but we just have much more of an attitude here of kind of we do what we told, we cooperate with each other, we're willing to kind of make sacrifices for a concept of the greater good. And if that's a bad thing in some contexts, but it's a good thing in others. And I'm kind of used to a lot of just sensibilities, things like we have a public healthcare system. And I've shit on the Canadian healthcare system a lot, and it's deeply, deeply flawed. But I do respect the idea that you don't make people debt slaves for the rest of their natural life because something bad happened. Same thing with stuff like education. The idea in the US that like student loans is acceptable to force people into debt slavery for the rest of their lives is just something as a Canadian that's kind of weird to me. Not to say that people don't do that here, but particularly when it comes to education and healthcare, it's nowhere near what it is in the U.S. Here, it's more just stuff like credit card debt. Rent is, I think, a lot more expensive in Canada than it is in the U.S. But we are used to, I think, just having the state provide more services here in a lot of cases than we are in the US. And you can say that makes us weak or whatever, but it's just kind of part of the culture here. From what people tell me, Canadians tend to be more polite and a little more reserved than Americans. Now, I go back and forth on this a lot. My personal view is probably red state Americans are ultimately friendlier. They just are probably a bit more standoffish with people they don't know, and they're just Americans are a very blunt people, and that is refreshing when you look at some other cultures. Like I find when you're dealing with people like Indians and Chinese, they will like praise you to your face and they'll say you're awesome, and then they'll backstab you the first chance they get because manners are more important to them, or external is more important to them than whatever the interior actually is. Well, once again, well, there's a lot of things that I hate about this country that we have. I always say Canada doesn't have the most liberal abortion laws on earth because we have like no laws on it, up to and including post birth. We have that. We're probably the most pro LGBTQ country in the world. We are the most like pro diversity, the most pro mass immigration. There is no political right wing in Canada. It's been completely and totally expunged. You have the conservatives, which are some people describe them as slightly to the left of the Democratic Party, which is probably true, actually, at least on social issues. I'd say they're more free market and less pro environment, which is sometimes a good thing and sometimes a bad thing. But there's a lot of things I also like about this country. I do like a lot of the holdovers we still have from when we were a colony, or rather a dominion of the United Kingdom. I like that we still have a monarch, even if the British monarchy is a shadow of what it used to be. I like that we have this kind of unique bicultural tradition. Maybe it's weird that I'm kind of praising this, but I do think it's interesting how Canada was formed from a combination of English and French, and that's kind of persisted over time. It does kind of give this country a bit of a unique flair. I do appreciate that Canada's a boring country. We haven't really had, I think we had the Upper Canada Rebellion and the Red River Rebellion, but we haven't had like civil wars or rebellions. The FLQ is like the lamest terrorist group ever. We haven't had race riots. It's just kind of largely a peaceful, boring, quiet country. And there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot to be said for, well, Canada's gotten involved in foreign wars. It's nowhere near to the same degree that like the U.S. is. As bad as our military is, and as much of an embarrassment it is. It's nice to know our military sucks so much. We don't really have to worry about attacking random countries or having to bear the blunt of it. I like that Canada is a boring largely peaceful country that, while geographically large and wealthy, doesn't really matter that much on the world stage. We talk about soft power and peacekeeping and diplomacy and all that stuff. But I always view Canada as a country that doesn't really matter that much. And there's not really anything wrong with that. I love greatness and bigness and imperial glory and all of that stuff as much as the next person. And if I was an American, I would be extremely proud of my country. But for actually living, I mean, there's something to be said by living in a boring country like Switzerland or maybe Denmark nowadays, or just some country, or Luxembourg, or some country that's really too small to be a global player. And you just kind of hang out there and just enjoy life. And that is something I do respect. I don't know. It's just, once again, you grow up looking at a particular map your whole life. You grow up saying, "This is here. This is where I belong. This is my home." Be it Southern Ontario or Manitoba. I think it's hard to kind of just throw that under the bus and look in another direction. There's also just practical career reasons that I won't go into why it wouldn't really make sense to move to the US. But like I said, it's just a completely different lifestyle. And that's when you're dealing with two of the most similar countries on earth. Like, Canadians basically, in a lot of ways, at least psychologically, we consider ourselves to kind of being an appendage to the US. You'll find that Canadians will often say our president or our country or our Congress or something like that because American influence is so dominant over our country. Also, just our country's so boring that we like to live vicariously through the US. But also, and I'm sorry for jumping around, the problem with a lot of red states is they're just really hot. I'm used to, as much as I hate the continental climate and would prefer if I was living on the coast or something like that, I don't think I could deal with living in like Louisiana or Alabama or even like Virginia's pretty hot in the summer. When I went to the DC during the summer, it was blistering. I mean, Toronto's pretty hot in the summer. Winnipeg can get pretty hot in the summer, but nothing like what it could be in the US. I guess there's like cooler red states like Montana, or I think Utah, the weather's not that bad because it's so high up in the mountains, even if it's fairly far south. But the other thing is, a lot of those states just don't really have any urban areas. And a lot of the urban areas in America are just so unpleasant you wouldn't want to live there. And I know there's the whole crush the urbanite meme and stuff like that, but I mean, that's where I'm from. It's very hard to just kind of throw that under the bus and say it doesn't matter or it's not relevant or something. So maybe this whole thing is just like a cope. Maybe this sounds like a cop out. But while I have a lot of respect for Russia and what Putin's doing, and that Orthodoxy has become the de facto state religion again, and they passed a lot of legislation supporting traditional marriage and patriotism and stuff like that. I think a lot of aspects of the Russian culture, the Russian way of life, are completely alien to me. And also, it just kind of feels like you're. What was it Obama said, that you're living in someone else's. And I don't think that would necessarily be the case if I moved to America, or the other place I would consider moving to if it ever got a bit better would be the UK. I'd love to live in Southern England. Southern England just looks beautiful. It looks like it has perfect weather. It's not There's not that much diversity there, so I wouldn't mind moving there, or I wouldn't mind living in the U.S. But it's just not. That's the closest thing, I guess, to another home that I could have. So I don't know. Maybe this was rambling and incoherent, but I think it's a fair question if I keep complaining about my home. Also, there's a uh, sorry, just a side note I forgot to mention. You know how in 1984 there's like hate is love. You normally hate something because you care about it. Like, there's lots of countries I hate that I don't really care. That I don't really talk about. Like, I don't talk about Venezuela that much. I don't ever talk about Haiti. I don't talk about like, I don't know, some random Asian countries, just because like I don't really care about them. The fact that I complain so much about America and Canada comes from the fact that I actually love these places. The same thing why I complain about Europe is it's my heritage. I don't want to see it destroyed. I don't want to see it go away. If I didn't care about it, if what was happening didn't upset me, I just wouldn't really be talking about it much. It would just be something that I don't particularly care about and that I never cover. So a lot of my anger is sorrow. It comes from watching even what I had growing up in the 90s, where after a lot of this stuff had already kind of been implemented, just watching it slip away and sinking more and more into morass. And I don't know, I'm not a particularly brave man. I'm not a particularly. I used to be somewhat politically active, but that was just kind of a lot of that was very depressing. Um, I will say this: I actually probably did more political stuff than most people in these. But once again, I don't want to dox myself and go into too much detail. But yeah, I just want to leave you with a video that I think this video was more or less how the alt right feels about everything, and I think it was very much ahead of its time. So let's let Bela Lugosi take us out.
Oh, I have no home. Abandoned, despised, living like an animal. Jungle is my home. That I will show the world that I can be its master. I will perfect my own race of people. A race of atomic supermen which will conquer the world.
Well, I think that's just about it. God bless everyone, and I'll talk to you later.